welcome to the People Chronicles. This is What's the Story? My name is Joe Painter. I am your host for What's the Story, and our guest this afternoon is Ray Bachard. Thanks for joining us, Ray.
Thank you for having me.
You made quite a journey to get here.
It was fine. I've been on much worse, much longer, and this was a piece of cake.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to travel to our studios here in Reading, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
You're an author.
Yes.
You're a speaker.
Yes.
You're a human rights advocate.
Yes.
I got to tell you, this is the book, and maybe you've seen this, The Berlin Turnpike. It's a true story. You got that? The Berlin Turnpike. It is a true story, and it's about human trafficking in America. And I have to tell you, about a year ago, I had an opportunity to interview Marty McGibbon. I don't know if you've ever heard of her or crossed paths with her.
Oh, sure.
But she was the victim of human trafficking.
Exactly, yeah.
And it was shocking to me. And then when I came across your book, I was, wait a minute. This is in America.
Yeah.
I think of human trafficking, and I think, you know, if we dare to think of it, because it's not a pretty thing, it's in another country. It's in the third world. It's not here under our noses.
Yeah.
That's not true, is it?
It gets us, you know, we hear a lot of reports. If you do hear about it in the United States, you hear about it with the phrase, oh, it's in our own backyard. And it's such a cliche now. I hate cliches to begin with as a writer, but it's as close to us as our smartphones. Because the way human trafficking works now is it isn't on the streets. It isn't walking on a street corner. It does happen that way to a small degree, but less and less so all the time. Where it has exploded is the internet and online. And through a multitude of websites that are strictly used to sell people for sex here in the United States. So the entire dynamic of how this crime takes place has changed in the past 10 or 15 years and continues to change more and more so every day. Now, you said about human trafficking, you don't want to think about. People really, some in criminal justice, law enforcement, don't know what human trafficking is.
How would you define it? What is it?
Well, I go by the federal law that defines it. I figured, you know, that's the best way to do it in the United States. It is any commercial sex act where force, fraud, or coercion are used to induce that act, or if the victim is under 18 years of age. So if there is force or fraud or coercion are used, any one of those, it's human trafficking. But if the victim is 17 years of age inclusive or younger, then that legal test is irrelevant and it's human trafficking. Otherwise, it's prostitution, and that's the difficulty. People see it as prostitution when it's human trafficking, and you really can't tell the difference.
So it's not prostitution if you're forced to prostitute yourself.
Exactly. Or coerced, or defrauded, or under 18. It then becomes human trafficking under federal law.
How does that happen?
It happens any number of ways.
I mean, it's big, is it not?
It's enormous and growing all the time. Because look at what the internet offers, both a buyer and a seller. The John, who is the customer, and the pimp, who is the seller.
Does it offer the first thing, anonymity?
And total anonymity for everybody.
Dangerous.
And you don't have to drive around in that part of town to look for someone on the street corner, maybe at night. It doesn't matter the time of day, the weather, where you are. You could have, quite frankly, someone here at the Crown within minutes, delivered to you like a pizza. Girls have become a commodity.
Is it mostly women?
Well, we don't know. The numbers are extremely difficult to come by. Anecdotally, yes, mostly women.
What do you say to the person that says, it's not human trafficking, they wouldn't be here if they didn't want to be here, they could just leave?
I have had people actually say that to victims. And it really acts like a cult of one. So that there is an intended addictive quality that is placed on the personality of the pimp or whoever's pimping the person. Sometimes drugs are involved. Many times drugs are involved. But really what happens is the younger the person is, the more malleable the personality is. And the easier they are to not only manipulate, but to convince that they cannot survive without that person, the pimp, in their life. So he or she can get them to do almost anything.
Where is the family of that person?
Sometimes they're the pimps. Sometimes
What
they're
do you mean? I mean, literally?
yeah. Sometimes it's a mother selling a daughter. As we had a case in Connecticut, the mayor of one of our major cities uh, asked a prostitute that had been arrested, and he wanted younger girls, so she got her daughter and her niece. He's doing prison time now.
What
Um,
happened to the mother?
so she was arrested as well for endangering the lives of her niece and her daughter. Sometimes it's a family member, sometimes it's a stranger, but very rarely is there a kidnapping. Because it's really, if someone's kidnapped, it makes the news all over the country through an Amber Alert.
Are they runaways?
Many times they are runaways, yes. And many times they go into it with a certain level of willingness or openness. They're coerced into it. Sometimes they're romanced into it by a pimp who can romance them and woo them.
If they're runaways, we would assume, which is never good to do, that they've left a bad situation. That's why they ran away. Something wasn't right at home anyway, and this is somehow better.
Many times you'll find people in cases of desperation, and this is true in the United States and in other places around the world, that they think that no matter what situation they get into, it's going to be better than the one they left. And quite frankly, sometimes that's true, although they have no control of their life in either situation. So in the case of the book, and this examines a federal trial that took place in Connecticut in 2007, the first of its kind under the federal human trafficking law. The girls were from Vermont and New Hampshire and a little high school in Connecticut, two of the girls.
High school?
Yeah, 14 and 16 years old.
How many girls?
He had over 100 in his stable. Dennis
One
Paris
person?
did. One person, yeah. One person, Dennis Paris, his trial we follow in the book, and it follows all the dynamics of how this takes place in America. None of the girls were from other countries. They're all American, as are the vast majority of human trafficking victims in the United States are American. Trafficking implies movement. It's really a bit of a misnomer. It has nothing to do with crossing state lines or crossing borders.
This trafficking,
it's about
can
the
you
selling.
say sale?
Yeah, it's really modern day slavery. It is a form of slavery.
Are they held against their will?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes they're literally locked up and held against their will. But it's much easier to hold somebody because you have their identification, you have the ability to rat them out to their family or their friends if that's going to hold them. Drugs, food, housing, everything. If they are,
so the chains aren't necessarily real.
No, no. In fact, drugs and the coercion that they're able to use now are much more effective than the chains and shackles of colonial slavery. Colonial era slavery. The girls in this book, they were allowed to go home for Christmas, and then they willingly came back. And that was the defense's argument. Why did they come back? And it was a difficult case to prove. Very difficult. The defense simply said, he's running an escort agency. These girls, the men are paying these girls to go on dates.
An escort agency is illegal, is it not?
No. An escort agency is not illegal.
I thought it was only legal in Nevada.
No, prostitution in certain counties in Nevada are illegal. So an escort agency is, I just need a date to go to a party with me. I call up and, okay, a pretty girl shows up with me at the party.
So what constitutes date? There's
exactly. And what the defense was, well, if they decide to have sex, that was there, but it didn't quite work out for them. In fact, not only didn't it work out for Dennis Paris, who was convicted, I'm not really giving anything away there, but his brother, just a couple of years later, was arrested for the very same crimes, along with his partner, who was his wife, who was a Connecticut state trooper. So when people ask... Wait a minute.
A Connecticut state trooper is involved in the trafficking of women.
Yes. Yeah, her trial is still pending, 4 years after her arrest.
What got you interested in this? Why did you decide to give so much of your energy and your life to this?
Well, I years ago worked for a number of human rights organizations around the world in different aspects of communication, audio and video communications, their first websites and things of that nature, and traveled all over the world documenting some of this human rights work. Along the way, witnessed what I didn't even know to call human trafficking in many forms, not only commercial sexual exploitation, but forced and exploited labor, child soldiering as well. So my first book was about child trafficking specifically in all of its forms around the world. But then we were doing a little documentary on a woman foster care mother in New York City who was taking care of a little girl named Karen, 5 years old, HIV positive, whose mother had tried to sell her when she was an infant on the streets of New York for $200. The mother was a crack addict. And a city worker was there with us that day to help us film this documentary. Said, you know, she's one of the lucky ones. She's 5 years old. She never saw her 7th birthday. And she was one of the lucky ones because what the city worker told me at that point was this happens all over this city every day.
What happens?
Children being sold. Just
a 5-year-old.
Well, she was 5 then. She was only a few days old when the mother tried to sell her. Yeah. So it still happens. And I thought to myself, how is she the lucky one to have ended up here but still ill and never making it to see her 7th birthday? How is this not the biggest story in the world that we still have children being sold every day all across the country this way? And that's what really that was the pivotal moment for me.
You were appalled, the injustice of that. And how does it happen in America?
And how does it, well, you know, it has always happened in America. Even after the Emancipation Proclamation 100 years ago, John D. Rockefeller commissioned a report in 1912 called The Commercialized Prostitution in New York City. Probably the last good study on it. And the way they describe 100 years ago how this crime worked, what they then called white slavery, is exactly the way it works now. How hotel operators are paid off, even the description of how the pimps romance and coerce the girls, everything. And as I show in the book, it's the way they're describing it works in the trial. You could have taken the language from 100 years ago in New York City and just planted it right in. Nothing's really changed.
Nothing has changed. But the internet has made it more prevalent.
Absolutely. And along with the acceptance now of pimpdom, of prostitution as a lifestyle, as pimp being an adjective of pimping out my car or pimping out my house, it's become acceptable language, and therefore the very concept has become more acceptable to us. A pimp is nothing more than a slave master, and there's no difference between the two. However, because it's this one particular word, we've taken away its negative connotation and therefore made the entire concept more acceptable to us.
No longer startling.
There are young men who and young women who aspire to this, to be both pimps and prostitutes now, because it's the taboo is taken away.
Can we change it? We'll find out. Stick around for part 2, and our guest is Ray Bachard here on What's the Story?